On the eve of World War I, there was a conflict in St. Paul and Minneapolis between streetcar workers and the Twin City Rapid Transit Company. It set the stage for the struggle to achieve the right of working people to organize in Minnesota and created national awareness of the plight of working men and women.
In the early 1900s, an organization called the Citizens Alliance is created, and it flows out of Minneapolis business owners. And they are working together to ensure that Minneapolis remains a town where union can't get much of a foothold.
People who were workers really understood that they were going to get shut down by this open shop movement called the Citizens Alliance. It was a pact among all the major employers in Minneapolis that they would cooperate internally amongst each other, that if any union tried to organize, they would be denied recognition and they wouldn't get anywhere. Workers didn't have protections. They could organize, but they would get stomped on if they organized.
The Citizens Alliance is not just this group of business people. Citizens Alliance is deeply embedded in the political structures of the city, in the economic structures of the city. It's the leading men of Minneapolis. They develop strategies for these moments when union organizers do come to Minneapolis and do try to start unions. Because of the ways in which they are able to flex their political and economic power, there are moments where they can actually engage strikebreakers if necessary. The Citizens Alliance is looking forward to trying to flex its muscle in St. Paul, but that doesn't happen until the 19-teens, and that only through particular circumstances that emerge because of events during World War I.
Over there, send the word, over there.
The Twin Cities Rapid Transit Company controls all the public transit in Minneapolis and St. Paul. They were able to take advantage of cheap labor by being resolutely anti-union. Because the Twin Cities Rapid Transit Company had been so bad to workers for so long, workers by 1916 and 1917 are becoming more and more frustrated, and by the fall, this is September 1917, they start thinking about figuring out how they're going to organize and how they're going to maybe even call a strike. If the streetcars are no longer running, no one can get anywhere. It's a pretty powerful way for workers to try to press back against business owners. And it affects not just the transit company, but companies of every kind in both cities.
The Citizens Alliance went to the municipal courts to get equity injunctions against trade union organizing. So if there was any kind of picketing, they would go to the courts and say, please get these people out of here because our business is in danger of being shut down and we're facing an emergency situation. That was the legal rationale. That a judge, using his power of equity, that is to say he could do something on an emergency basis, would simply say, you can't banner this place, or you can't stand outside. And if you do, what you're doing is a criminal conspiracy. We're going to arrest you and throw you in jail. So if you're sitting there in St. Paul or Minneapolis and you're thinking, you know, I think we ought to have a trade union, but people say that if I try to do that, I'm a criminal conspirator, this is really going to tick you off.
In some ways, this makes St. Paul labor organizations stronger, and it also gets them looking for allies. So it's the first time you have unions that are working across these city boundaries. So in September of 1917, you have a small-scale strike. A Minneapolis order is kept through the Citizens Alliance calling out their kind of quasi-law enforcement with this home guard made up of men in their 30s and 40s who are volunteers, who are armed, and who are meant to ensure that public order is kept during this wartime emergency. They ensure that there is no public disorder, that there aren't any marches or parades or much kind of union activity at all in Minneapolis. But in St. Paul, it's very different because there you don't have a Citizens Alliance, and business people are used to at least trying to work out their differences with union leaders. In St. Paul, the streetcars are disrupted, and that's a real problem. And so you have a large number of people in the streets, thousands of people in the streets. Eventually, a call for mediation is made. So the strike ends pretty quickly. The union doesn't necessarily get all of what it wants, but the company starts to engage in negotiations. But in the meantime, during a wartime emergency, any disruption to the public's business or to public infrastructure is deemed potentially undercutting the war effort. By November, the federal government is getting involved. Woodrow Wilson's administration in Washington, D.C. is saying, look, there's all kinds of stuff happening. These tensions are still simmering in St. Paul. And in Minneapolis, less is happening because the Citizens Alliance is able to literally control all the public spaces to keep union workers from organizing. And so in St. Paul, this simmering tension erupts again in December. In December, you have a large rally in Rice Park in St. Paul, attracts thousands of workers. You have public disorder. The Home Guard basically puts a stop to the strike and forces these workers to go back to work. Therefore, in Minnesota in 1917 and 1918, you get a variety of civil liberties that are trampled on. This was a real kind of shock to the system for St. Paul business people. First, to see so much public disorder in the streets, and second, the fact that the union people wouldn't even be listened to, that they'd be shut down by law enforcement or quasi-law enforcement agencies. They realized that the Citizens Alliance has been able to extend its power into St. Paul in this way that no one really anticipated, largely because the industry that workers were striking in was something that connected the two cities. So this kind of violence on the streets not only attracted national attention, but made it clear that working people needed to have the opportunity, at least, to organize, and that the federal government maybe should actually provide workers with the right to organize a union. That had never been a federally recognized right for workers anywhere in the United States.
Prairie Mosaic is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4, 2008, the North Dakota Council on the Arts, and by the members of Prairie Public.